Cleopatra, a name that feels carved out of stone, written in gold, whispered by history with a mix of awe and fear. People think they know Cleopatra, the seductress, the temptress, the woman who brought down Rome. But that story is a lie, a lazy myth, a smear campaign written by the men who hated Cleopatra and feared Cleopatra. The real Cleopatra was something else entirely, a genius ruler, a politician sharper than the dictators of Rome, a strategist who fought for her kingdom with every breath, and a woman who refused to let the world decide her fate. This is Cleopatra's real story, not the Hollywood version, not the Roman gossip, but the life of a queen who became the last spark of Egyptian glory before the world changed forever. And I promise you, by the end of this film, Cleopatra will not be the woman you thought she was. Let's begin. Cleopatra didn't lose Egypt because Cleopatra was reckless or romantic. Cleopatra lost Egypt because Cleopatra was the only ruler in the East still strong enough, smart enough, and brave enough to challenge Rome. And Rome never forgave Cleopatra for that. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE into a world collapsing around her. Egypt, once the most powerful empire on the planet, had become a shadow drowning in debt, controlled by foreign generals, pushed around by Rome, and ruled by a family that loved each other slightly less than they loved murder. Cleopatra was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal family placed on Egypt's throne after Alexander the Great conquered the region. This family had one rule: do not let anyone else take the throne, even if that means killing your siblings and your parents and maybe your children. It was a family tree shaped like a knife. So when Cleopatra was born, no one expected that the fourth daughter of a troubled king would one day fight the greatest empire on earth. But Cleopatra was different. Cleopatra wasn't just royal, Cleopatra was brilliant. While the Ptolemies acted like Greek tourists ruling Egypt from the comfort of their palaces, Cleopatra did something none of her ancestors had done for almost 300 years. Cleopatra learned to speak the Egyptian language. Not just speak it, command it. This was Cleopatra's superpower. Cleopatra spoke 9 languages and used every one of them to navigate the dangerous, boiling world that awaited her, because Egypt was about to explode, and Cleopatra would become its center of gravity. Before Cleopatra ever sat on the throne, Cleopatra had to survive her own family. Her father, Ptolemy XII, also known by the charming nickname Orleats, meaning the flute player, was unpopular, corrupt, and deeply in debt. Egypt was broke. Rome owned everything. The people hated their king so much that a rebellion forced him to flee, leaving Cleopatra and her siblings behind. Cleopatra grew up not in safety, but in a palace filled with spies, rival siblings, and Roman ambassadors who treated Egypt like a dying animal waiting to be carved. But Cleopatra watched, and Cleopatra learned. When her father reclaimed the throne with Roman help, he signed away Egypt's independence in exchange for their swords. And when Cleopatra was 18 years old, he died, leaving his will, his last command. Cleopatra must rule Egypt, but Cleopatra must share the throne with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. And just like that, Cleopatra became queen, with a child king next to her, and a group of greedy advisors waiting to tear her off the throne. Egypt had a queen. Egypt also had a problem. Cleopatra immediately took control, not fully, but clearly. Coins were minted with Cleopatra's face alone, not her brother's. Documents were signed in Cleopatra's name. The court began seeing Cleopatra as the actual ruler. But the boy king's guardians, powerful men who wanted Egypt for themselves, didn't like that. So they did what every insecure, power-hungry group does. They tried to erase Cleopatra. Cleopatra was exiled from Alexandria, kicked out of her own palace, forced into the desert with nothing but a few loyal followers. Most rulers would assume the throne was gone forever. But Cleopatra wasn't most rulers. Cleopatra was a strategist. Cleopatra marched east, raised an army, prepared for a civil war, and waited. Because Cleopatra knew something the advisors didn't. Rome was coming, and with Rome came opportunity. 48 BCE. Julius Caesar enters Alexandria, chasing his rival Pompey during the Roman Civil War. Caesar expected chaos. He found something worse, a city tearing itself apart in a sibling war, 2 Egyptian monarchs claiming the throne, 2 armies ready to spill blood, and 1 woman, Cleopatra, who saw the future before anyone else. Cleopatra knew Caesar was the key, not because Cleopatra wanted romance, not because Cleopatra wanted power through seduction, but because Cleopatra was about to play her greatest political card. Cleopatra needed an audience with Caesar, but Ptolemy's forces would kill Cleopatra on sight if Cleopatra walked through the gates, so Cleopatra did something legendary. Cleopatra had herself smuggled into the palace, rolled inside a carpet or a linen sack, historical accounts differ, carried straight through enemy lines, and unrolled at Caesar's feet. That single moment changed history. Not because Cleopatra looked like a goddess, she didn't rely on beauty. Not because Cleopatra seduced Caesar with magic, Cleopatra seduced Caesar with strategy. Cleopatra spoke to Caesar in his language, Greek. Cleopatra understood Roman politics better than many senators. Cleopatra positioned herself as an ally, not a prize. Caesar saw not a girl, not a victim, not a lover, but a queen, ready to rule, and Caesar made his choice. Cleopatra would be restored to the throne. Restoring Cleopatra wasn't a simple signing of papers. It triggered a civil war. For months, Caesar and Cleopatra fought Ptolemy the 13th's forces inside Alexandria. Streets turned into battlegrounds. Palaces became fortresses. The great library caught fire. Thousands died, and Cleopatra fought beside Caesar, not as a lover, as a co-ruler defending her kingdom. When the war was over, Ptolemy the 13th drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra regained the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy the 14th. But it wasn't a simple victory. It was the moment Cleopatra realized Egypt's survival depended on Rome. And Caesar realized Rome's future depended on Cleopatra. Shortly after, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesarion. Many Romans hated the idea of Caesar having an Egyptian heir. But Cleopatra didn't care. Cleopatra had secured a dynasty. Years later, Cleopatra traveled to Rome with Caesarion. Cleopatra lived in Caesar's villa. Cleopatra was displayed as a foreign queen, a living symbol of alliance. Some Romans admired Cleopatra, others feared Cleopatra, and others still despised Cleopatra, especially the senators who hated Caesar. Cleopatra represented everything they couldn't control: wealth, intelligence, foreign power, and the possibility of a new royal bloodline. When Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, Cleopatra's world collapsed in one stroke. Cleopatra fled Egypt immediately, not in fear, but in calculation. Cleopatra knew Rome would tear itself apart in a new civil war. Cleopatra had to protect Egypt, and Cleopatra had to protect Caesarion. So Cleopatra returned to Alexandria and prepared for the next storm. That storm had a name: Mark Antony. This documentary isn't about Antony, but you cannot understand Cleopatra without understanding the alliance that defined the end of Egypt's independence. Mark Antony was not Caesar. He was impulsive, emotional, brilliant in war, but chaotic in life. When Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, many thought Cleopatra would decline. But Cleopatra saw opportunity. Cleopatra sailed up the Cydnus River on a golden barge. dressed as the goddess Isis, not to seduce Antony, but to show Antony that Cleopatra was not a regional queen. Cleopatra was Egypt. Antony was dazzled. But more importantly, Antony needed Cleopatra's money and resources. Cleopatra needed Antony's military strength. It was a partnership, personal, political, and powerful. Together they planned to stabilize the East, defend Egypt, and challenge Octavian, the rising Roman leader, who wanted to finish what Caesar started. But alliances built on ambition are not alliances built on safety. Octavian was ruthless. Octavian understood propaganda better than anyone, since Cleopatra herself. So Octavian painted Cleopatra as a foreign witch who had bewitched Antony and planned to overthrow Rome. Rome believed it. War was inevitable. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. A naval clash between Antony and Octavian and Cleopatra, whose fleet supplied and supported the battle. But the winds changed. Antony's commanders failed. The battle turned into chaos. Cleopatra made a strategic retreat, not betrayal, but survival. Antony followed. Octavian claimed victory. The East began to fall. Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, knowing one truth: Egypt was next. Cleopatra did not surrender. Cleopatra negotiated. Cleopatra bribed. Cleopatra strategized. Cleopatra tried to position Caesarion as the rightful heir of Caesar, and thus a potential ally of Rome. Octavian refused. Octavian wanted Cleopatra alive, to march Cleopatra through Rome in chains. But Cleopatra would never allow that. Not for herself, not for Egypt, not for her children. When Antony took his own life after hearing false news of Cleopatra's death, Cleopatra built a mausoleum, locked herself inside, and prepared to join him. Octavian rushed to stop her. He wanted Cleopatra alive. Cleopatra claimed she needed time to prepare for her appearance. It was a lie, a final act of resistance, because Cleopatra was preparing not for humiliation, but for death. How Cleopatra died is still debated. Some say Cleopatra used an aspi, a venomous snake, to bite Cleopatra. Others say Cleopatra used poison hidden in a hairpin. Whatever the method, Cleopatra died on Cleopatra's own terms. Not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, as a queen. When Octavian found Cleopatra dead, he realized something tragic. He had won Rome, but he had lost the symbol Rome wanted the most. Cleopatra's death marked the end of the Hellenistic age, the end of Egypt's independence, the end of a world. Caesarion was executed shortly after, ending the Ptolemaic line. Egypt became a Roman province, and Cleopatra became legend. So who was Cleopatra? Not the seductress of myth, not the femme fatale of Roman propaganda. Cleopatra was a polyglot genius, a master of diplomacy, a strategist raised in a palace of knives, a mother fighting for her son, a queen balancing between two collapsing empires. A ruler who kept Egypt alive decades longer than anyone expected. The last pharaoh of a 3,000-year-old civilization. Cleopatra wasn't Rome's victim. Cleopatra was Rome's rival. And Rome never forgave Cleopatra for that. Cleopatra fought an empire with nothing but intelligence, courage, and willpower. She lost the war, but she won immortality. Cleopatra's life was not a tragedy. Cleopatra's life was a battle cry, the final spark of Egyptian sovereignty in a world consumed by giants. Cleopatra stood alone between Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra held the line as long as any human could. And when Cleopatra fell, an age ended, a civilization ended, a world ended, but Cleopatra's story didn't end. Because Cleopatra is still here, in the myths, the movies, the classrooms, the arguments, the fascination. Cleopatra lost her kingdom, but Cleopatra won eternity. If Cleopatra's story moved you, wait until you see the forbidden love that changed Rome forever. Click the next video and witness Cleopatra and Julius Caesar's untold relationship.